It has created some of the most iconic tunes and concepts throughout the history of music. With often a distortion type of sound and an astonishing image, rock music has lived on to become one of the most popular music genres. But how could a genre live and develop for that long? And first of all, why do people like it that much? To learn anything from the rock music genre, we have to go back to where it started from. And this is of course with the rock and roll in the 1950s. The rock and roll bands were pretty similar to the current rock bands, with a vocalist, a drummer, a guitarist and a bassist, but is typical for its happy mood and notion for swing music. The word rock and roll is totally coined by a disc jockey named Alan Freed, when he started to call his fuzzy rhythm and blues discs for rock and roll. He did this because he wanted a new word that no one didn't knew anything about, or had any prejudice against, so he could reach out to both sides of the skin color divided youth in America. Rock and roll was its time's rebellious genre, provoking the overprotective and naive view the kids of the time thought their parents to have. Rock and roll had definite roots from the earlier genre blues. For example, in early rock and roll songs, the piano or saxophone was usually the lead instrument, but this was later put aside by new machinery, the electric guitar. By becoming popular in rock and roll, the electric guitar would eventually turn iconic for the genre rock music. During this era, people could hear and even watch artists like Chuck Berry, Bill Haley, and of course Mr. Elvis Presley, with his most intense and fast dancing and movements. Oh, and this man is later, for you who didn't know, crowned as the king of rock and roll. Over the years, rock and roll expanded and grew, and through bands like the Beach Boys, it turned into what we today recognize more as rock music. And the scene eventually got taken over by Great Britain. This age was called the Golden Age of rock music, or the British Invasion. The British Invasion is one of the more recognizable part of the history of rock music. The band started out in music metropoles such as Liverpool and Manchester, and had a great American influence, taking inspiration from soul, blues and the earlier rock and roll. Bands who led the British invasion of the rock music were, for example, Rolling Stones and The Who. And then there was another band that was told that they were never getting out of Liverpool, and they pretty much conquered the world. As the rock genre grew, so did the variety of rock clubs. After the British invasion, sub-genres like blues, folk and psychedelic rock formed, and rock music was at its peak. To begin with, the blues rock had its roots from the early 20th century's blues and the jazz. With long improvisations and round guitar sounds, this subgenre became popular through artists like Eric Clapton, Janis Joplin and ZZ Top. Folk music were born in the American pubs in Greenwich Village, where strangely enough also this guy got attention. His name is Robert Zimmerman, but you may know him as Bob Dylan. He mainly played protest songs and is probably the most known American folk music singer and songwriter. Besides him, Simon & Garfunkel was another band that stood for counterculture. They are, as Bob Dylan, also an icon for the time's social revolution music that was really popular within the folk rock. The 60s was also the scene for psychedelic rock. This genre, heavily inspired by drugs, came out of the folk rock. The music from this genre attempts to imitate the hallucinatory effects that psychedelic drugs provides, and by so is often played with overdriven tunes, backward tapes, delayed loops and intense reverbs. Besides the earlier known The Beatles, Jimi Hendrix was very popular, becoming an icon of this genre. Out of the ability to experiment with music came the progressive rock. The progressive rock was an attempt to prove that rock music could have the same artistic performances that earlier music genres had. With the skills of the artists and their use of the instruments as paintbrushes, so to speak, bands like Boston and Yes took over the scenes. But the genre was not complete before Pink Floyd sold an estimated 50 million copies of the album Dark Side of the Moon. The Prism album made progressive rock one of its kind. Out of the psychedelic rock, glam rock was also born. Special clothes, makeup and controversial hairstyles was equally important as the music. The genre had its roots in both rock and roll and progressive rock. By becoming a most special subcategory of rock, glam rock eventually criticized the gender roles of the time, meaning that a rock artist, or any human in particular, didn't need to hold on to a gender. This was a brief history of rock music, the years 1950 to 1979. Stay tuned for part 2 and don't forget to subscribe.